what is your institution doing in terms of gender equity? What is your institution doing in terms of inclusiveness? What is your institution doing in terms of promoting good quality, where it is with equity and justice? So I think all these things will get blended together when we are actually looking into sexual harassment in the workplace. So the central theme is the workplace and how we actually look at women in the workplace. And I think it is very, very important because the numbers that you have of women entering different kinds of jobs, entering higher education, entering different occupational disciplines, it is increasing several times now. And if you look at a university like ours, we have around 75% of our students who are actually women. So Professor Anita is going to share her thoughts, her views on this, and I think we'll have some kind of interaction towards the end. With the consent of the entire audience, with your blessings, I declare this program as inaugurated. I wish the Department of Psychology, all the learners, the very best in their academic pursuits. And I hope there will be a takeaway from everything that we hear and see and observe in terms of best practices, best experiences, best outcomes possible. So thank you so much and wish this program all success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, the moment we have all been waiting for, I cordially invite our esteemed scholar, Dr. Anitha Menon, Madam, to deliver the keynote address.
Uh, Thank you so much for that introduction. I just want to make sure that I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
All
You are
right.
audible.
Okay. So if I mean, I'm not presenting. So Bindu is presenting the
No,
slides. So Bindu,
uh,
can you bring up the
oh, sure,
slides,
sure.
please?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, and put it on slideshow. Are you able to put it on slideshow?
I'll show it. Is it
Yeah.
okay, ma'am?
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I really would have liked to present this myself. But, that gives me some control. But since there's some technical difficulty, thank you, Bindu, for coming up and helping out. So, good evening to you all, and thank you for taking time off during your busy work day to join in on this webinar. And thank you so much to the psychology department at the Kerala University for this invitation to make the presentation on sexual harassment at workplace. And this is indeed a topic that I'm very, very passionate about. I started working on issues of sexual harassment way back in 2006, and I will be sharing with you some of the experiences as well as some literature that we have found. You can go on to the next slide, Bindu. Okay, so you've heard a bit about me. So I've been based in Zambia for the last 30 years, and I've been at the University of Zambia and other places. I have about 28 years of experience working outside Zambia. And since the end of December 2020, I'm actually in Trivandrum. I came here to visit my dad, but I have stayed over due to some personal reasons. And during this time, I've also taken up a consultancy with GeoFluid, which is a Mumbai-based company. And that has given me some perspective about working in India. So this is the first time I'm working in India. So this is a great opportunity for me. And thank you, Satya, for giving me this opportunity. I believe you are on the webinar today as well.
I am. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a little bit about Zambia. So Zambia is a small country. It's a landlocked country in Africa. And Bindu, if you can just do one more click, please. Yeah, so Zambia is the home to Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls is the one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. So if you do get a chance to visit, please do. It's absolutely beautiful. So you're welcome to Zambia at some point. And go on to the next slide. Yeah. So in this webinar, I'm hoping that we can together look at an overview of what sexual harassment is. I'll talk a little bit about my research. So my research on sexual harassment has been mainly in academia. So sexual harassment happening at universities. And I'll also talk a little bit about sexual harassment that happens at other places of work other than universities. Can go on to the next slide. Thank you. And the next slide. So this is a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So those of you who know Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she was the Associate Justice at the Supreme Court in the United States of America. We lost her in September 2020. She was very passionate about gender-based issues. And this is a quote which I think is very powerful. She says that I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of my brethren is to take your feet off our neck. So what exactly is she saying here? She says that as a woman, I'm not asking for any favor. You don't have to give me any privilege. You don't have to treat me differently, but do not abuse me. That's all I ask for. And to that, I would also like to add on that this is not just for women. It's also applicable to any human being. Every human being has the right to be respected, has the right not to be abused, and we have to stand up for our rights. Go on to the next slide, please. So we have a lot of people in the world for who work is an important part of their life. And while we work, there's a lot of hazards that we face at our workplace. It could be accidents, it could be relationship issues, it could be illnesses, and so on. And when you have sexual harassment, that adds on to the burden of the risk that is faced at a workplace. The next slide. So this is a case study that I pulled out. This is from a report that came out in the national newspaper in Zambia. I thought, let me give you an international perspective rather than pulling out something from India. So this report was written by the person who faced some sexual harassment. And she was so embarrassed to talk about her situation. And she was also fearful that even as she wrote this report, she used a pseudonym. She used Sarah here is actually her pseudonym. So Sarah was a reporter in a private TV station, and she was, after a while, she resigned and she was looking for another job, but after many months, she couldn't find a job, so she decided to go back to her previous employers to find out if they could take her back. And as Sarah went to her former boss and explained the situation to him, he was very empathetic and said that she could have a job back, but on the condition that she allowed him to touch her breast. And we very well know that it doesn't stop there. And the reason he gave was, he said that he was tired of helping women for free. So how is that? So he's asking for a favor and in return would give her a job. And this is a very typical case of sexual harassment that can happen at a workplace. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, but these days we find that sexual harassment is the in thing that people are talking about. And many times there is a media hype that anything happening at workplace, even between friends, even when there is consensual relationship, it is considered to be sexual harassment. So we do need to be cautious of such situation, that sexual harassment is not a behavior which is mutually agreed upon. But a defining factor of sexual harassment is that a single incident is enough to constitute sexual harassment. So someone cannot say that I only touched your breast once and therefore it's not sexual harassment. No, you did it, you didn't do the right thing, you have abused me, and therefore it is definitely sexual harassment. Okay, so even one incident can constitute sexual harassment, and the person has every right to complain against that. The next slide. Yeah. Just to give you a glimpse of the types of sexual harassment, so this is not a conclusive list of the types of sexual harassment. The quid pro quo is a situation where it is like you pat my back and I pat yours. So you do a favor for me and I will do something back. You come out for dinner with me and I will give you a promotion. So that's sort of a situation. Sexual coercion is when there is a compulsion to engage in a sexual act. So it can be a physical act, a verbal act, a visual act. A visual act would be if somebody is compelled to watch a pornography. Unwanted sexual attention, this is, if you look at that cartoon figure, the last one, the bottom one on the screen, you find that a man has his hand on the woman's shoulder, and obviously she is not happy about it. So that would be an example of unwanted sexual attention. And another form is gender harassment, where someone is harassed because of their gender. Okay. Next. Okay, so I'm going on to talking about sexual harassment in academia, and here I'm going to talk about some of my research that I've been doing. So I got involved in sexual harassment work in 2006 when I was given the responsibility of coming up with an HIV and AIDS policy for the University of Zambia. And during that process, we found that there was a lot of cases of sexual harassment happening, and we couldn't, of course, ignore that. So that led to a process of various studies and so on. The next slide. So this is exactly what happened. So when we found there was sexual harassment that was happening, we did a baseline study which led to a sexual harassment policy, a follow-up study, policy review where the sexual harassment policy was revised. So those of you who are from the research field and understand it would know that this is a kind of an implementation science kind of a research that was happening. The next slide. And all this led to many publications, a couple of examples of that. So if any of you are interested in reading up on the work, you're welcome to get in touch with me and I can send you the full papers. The next slide. Okay, so when the baseline study was conducted, what we found was that the knowledge of sexual harassment was there. People understood that sexual harassment is an issue affecting the University of Zambia. And, but at the same time, the reporting was almost nil. Nobody went forward to report sexual harassment. And the reasons given was that they were embarrassed to make a report, or they didn't believe that even if they report, there would be any action that would be taken. And it was also interesting to find that many students and staff at the University of Zambia did not recognize certain acts to be sexual harassment. For example, they did not think that remarks about sexual activity constituted sexual harassment, or physical interference with work also constituted sexual harassment. But overall, the take-home message was that there was a lot of perceived sexual harassment to be occurring at the University of Zambia. So based on that, next slide, we found out that there were various forms of sexual harassment that took place at the University of Zambia. There was physical harassment, visual harassment, verbal actions which were harassment. And also harassment was based on the principle that the person who was the harasser was always in a position of power. It was a person in the position of power who initiated the harassment. And the harassment took place between various groups at the University of Zambia. So you could even have staff members being harassed by students, and students being harassed by staff members, and so on. But a defining factor here again was that there was always an element of threat or coercion when harassment took place. The next slide. So based on what we found in the baseline study, it was found important to have a policy on sexual harassment. So the policy was launched in 2010. And later on in 2018, we did a follow-up study, and we found that from 2010 to 2018, there were only 3 cases of sexual harassment that was reported. Does that mean that there was no sexual harassment happening at our university? Of course not. There were many cases, but it was not reported. And even of the 3 which were reported, only 2 were followed up, and there was no resolution to any of those. And this was quite embarrassing for us as researchers and implementers of the policy, that it was not having an effect. And when we looked at who had seen the policy, it was less than a third of the population who had ever seen the sexual harassment policy. And of those who had seen it, there was even a lesser number, about a third, who had read the policy. So obviously the policy was not being implemented correctly. It was not having the effect it should have in addressing the issue of sexual harassment at the university. Next slide. Fortunately for us, we got some funding from Global Health, through which we initiated another implementation science research. And the next slide. In this, we used a 2-pronged approach, where simultaneously we launched various awareness campaigns on sexual harassment. At the same time, we evaluated the policy on sexual harassment. So there was a lot of awareness campaigns going on, and based on the evaluation, there was recommendations made, and there were some user-friendly resources that were put on up on our website. So the sexual harassment policy is a booklet, and I really don't think it's fair to expect students and staff to be reading through a 20-page booklet. So we did come up with an infographic which could convey that message about reporting very shortly, very accurately, and specifically. And hopefully that would bring about the change that we were looking for. The next slide. So while we did this, the methodology that we used was, we used online surveys, and we also did focus group discussions and awareness campaigns, and all this was widely publicized on social media. So we had quite a bit of participants volunteering to take part in the activities that we were doing. So those students you see there with the orange t-shirts, they are volunteers who came up to do the awareness campaign. So we trained them to be peer educators to do this awareness campaign. The next slide. So just to give you some few key findings, was that even after so many years, so this was done in 2019, 2020, many were not aware of the policy, and the reporting was really, really poor. especially in students. If you look at the numbers there, you have 5%, 7% who were reporting. Even in staff, it was 5% and 10% who were actually reporting. The next slide, please. And the major reasons for not reporting was that they did not know how to report or where to report. So the procedure for reporting was quite unclear, and therefore they did not report what was happening. So based on this, the policy has been revised. It has been made more user-friendly, and hopefully we'll be able to see more impact on the policy quite soon. So the point I'm trying to drive at is it's not enough to have a policy. It's important that the policy is evaluated and implemented in a way that it will be effective. You can go on to the next slide. So now we are going to look at sexual harassment at other places of work. University is also a place of work, but generally sexual harassment at places of work. You can go on to the next slide. So in India, in 2013, there was the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, which was effected. This act, which is popularly known as the POSH Act, it's applicable to all organizations, be it in the private sector or in the public sector. And it also includes not just the workplace, but any place that the employees visit as a part of their work, be it their transportation to work, whether they are visiting clients or if the client is visiting them. So all this is covered by this act. And what I found very interesting was that this is called sexual harassment of women at workplace, meaning that here there's an assumption that only women are harassed at workplace, which I disagree with. I think it can happen to both men and women. So those of you who are familiar with this act, I don't know, you might be able to say later on if there has been some, what has been seen, how has this act been used when a male employee has been harassed. The next slide. So the definition that is given by POSH includes the physical aspect of harassment, the verbal aspect of harassment, the visual aspect of harassment, and non-verbal aspect of harassment. So that is beautiful. The act covers all aspects of sexual harassment, whether it's direct or implied. And the act makes it very clear that it's the duty of every employer to provide a safe working environment, and also it mandates that the employer provides for an awareness program for sexual harassment prevention in all organizations. The next slide. The act also mandates that any organization which has more than 10 employees should have an internal complaint committee. And the committee should be made up of 4 positions. And these are the 4 positions. So the committee should be presided by an officer who is a woman working at a senior level in the office. There should be a member in the committee who is committed to the cause of women. Another person who has a legal knowledge and experience in social work, and it should also include an external member from an NGO, someone who is familiar with issues related to sexual harassment. So this is the recommendation that is given by the Act for the ICC for any organization to have. The next slide. Okay, I was reading a research that was carried out by the Indian National Bar Association, which was carried out about 3 years back. Again, I found this very interesting because what was found in this research was very similar to what we found in Zambia. That Many women chose not to report sexual harassment to the management because of embarrassment, because of they lacked confidence, or because they lacked confidence in the complaint mechanism. And it was also found that many organizations, though there was this law about sexual harassment, did not comply to that law. And the internal complaint committees did not do their jobs in the way that they were mandated to do their jobs. And there was also a cultural aspect that I found interesting in the study, was that many times women and girls do not want to talk about sexual harassment to their family because of the fear that their family would ask them to stop working. So rather than addressing the issue directly, they would tell them, run away from it, which is not the right thing to do. If there is something happening, it should be addressed rather than trying to move away from that issue. The next slide. So some of the common consequences of sexual harassment. So Bindu talked about it in her opening remarks. I have tried to group them into three categories here. So you have the career-related consequences, which are like not performing adequately in the job, absenteeism, resigning from a job, and so on. You have the health consequences, the physiological consequences, such as headaches, lack of sleep, panic reactions. And you have the psychological consequences, such as depression, anxiety, low esteem, guilt, shame, and so on. So we see that there are many consequences of sexual harassment, which is not definitely pleasant, and therefore it's important that we do something about it. You don't just keep quiet when you're experiencing harassment, but you act on it. So what is it that we can do? And this is from my personal experience of interacting with people who have been harassed, and based on what the organizations are doing. The first thing would be to stay calm. I do know this is very difficult. It's easy to say, but it is very difficult for a person who is experiencing the harassment to do. But as much as possible, it's important that you stay calm and, if necessary, get social support from your family, your friends, and so that you are able to share that experience with them, and also get them to give you the support that is needed. The next thing would be to explain to the person what is offensive. So you will need to think for yourself, why do I find this offensive? Is it the way that the person is talking? Is it something that they are doing which is offensive? So think about it yourself. And sometimes the person does not understand or does not realize that their act or their behavior is offensive to some other person. So give them that benefit of doubt. So try to tell them that I do not find your behavior to be comfortable. You can try to tell them that. And of course, you need to report. And in many organizations, it's the HR department which deals with sexual harassment. But in India, it's mandated that you have the committee to deal with the harassment. And then to be trying to cope with the stressful effects of sexual harassment. And this, again, you can do through getting social support. You can do through seeking professional help. You have seen all the consequences of sexual harassment, so that it's not something that you should be overlooking. You do need to do something about it. You do need to act on it, report it, act on it, and to cope with it. Yeah, the next slide. And to me, sexual harassment prevention at workplace is important, and what I would recommend is a zero tolerance. Do not tolerate sexual harassment. If sexual harassment occurs and it's proved that the person was involved in that act, the person should go. It should not be tolerated. They should not be given another chance, is my preference for how things should go. So every organization, it's important that there is a policy, not that there is a policy, but the employees need to be educated about the policy, and the policy should be implemented in a way that it can be monitored. And when there is any investigation, it's important that confidentiality is maintained. This is a very sensitive issue. This is not gossip. You cannot be talking about it to others. So confidentiality is very essential. And when someone makes a complaint, retaliation might occur. So that should always be at the back of your mind, that if there is retaliation, the person who is making the complaint should be protected. And do not wait for long before you can take corrective action. It should be done immediately. You cannot waste time waiting before you take a corrective action. Next slide, Bindu. So my message, my take-home message to all of you who have joined in on this webinar is: take appropriate action against sexual harassment. Do something about it. Do not keep quiet. Act on it. You have every right to act on any abuse against you. So do take action. It may not be you particularly who is involved. Even if you know of someone who is being harassed, it's important that you encourage them to act against this sexual harassment. So thank you so much for your attention, and you have my email there. If you do want to get in touch with me for any more information, or just to start a conversation on this issue of sexual harassment, please do get in touch with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for that insightful talk. The floor is now open for questions. If any one of you have any questions, kindly switch on your mic and ask them. Or you can also post your queries in the chat box.
Hello, ma'am. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Okay, ma'am, I would like to ask a question about the topic. That is, I'm a student of economics. Actually, I'm very much interested in the psychology. That's why I'm eager to hear the talk conducted by psychology department. First of all, very much thank you for your talk. And my question is, ma'am, is there any relationship between psychology and this kind of attitude of men towards sexual harassment of men towards women? Is there any psychological angle in this issue?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. You have actually hit the nail. You said that, is there an attitude involved? So that is exactly what is involved in sexual harassment. So attitude of the harasser towards the people who are working for them or working with them. So that attitude is what would constitute the harassment itself. That leads to the harassment. And also the other psychological aspect is that uh, there are various psychological consequences to sexual harassment. So if it is not addressed, these things are not addressed, what happens is that there could be some very serious psychological consequences. It could be stress, which could turn on to becoming a clinical depression, and people would become anxious. It could lead to panic attacks and such things.
I hope that clears your query, Parvati.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, one question also, ma'am. That is, if any kind of this kind of psychological attitude of a person who a harasser is involved in this issue, then how can we control it legally? Is there any other, this kind of psychological remedies is need to be initiated to control this? Is there any importance for the inclusion of psychological methods to control, these kind of issues in the society? Does the
Uh,
importance of psychology is relevant in this issue?
Absolutely, Parvati. So there could be various interventions that could be put in place to address sexual harassment. So you must remember that most of the human behavior is learned. So if a behavior can be learned, it can also be unlearned. So the consequence for the harasser should be a serious one, so that they do not involve in that act again. So that is why I'm saying I'm talking about zero tolerance of sexual harassment at workplace. So it is the consequence that can deter them from being involved in more harassment. If there is no consequence, they are not going to change their behavior. So the consequence should be such that the behavior can be changed. And also, it's important that this education about sexual harassment, about respecting other human beings, you don't just start talking about it when a person starts working, but you actually start talking about it from early years, even from school years. So this should be a continuous education, just like you have continuous sexual education. So this, I would recommend that issues of gender-based violence and sexual harassment is a part of it, becomes a part of the learning that everybody undergoes right from school days, so that this attitude, it doesn't come up when you're older. It starts when you're younger. You learn about these things, and it's possible to condition a person so that their attitude changes.
Okay, mine's pretty clear. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. There is a question in the chat box. Shall I read it out to you? Ma'am, the question is how to curb sexual harassment in unorganized sector like film industries.
Sorry. So even if the film industry is an unorganized sector, it's possible that the person who is involved in the sexual harassment can face some consequences. They could be barred from acting in movies, for example. So what I'm saying is that there should always be a consequence for being involved in that act. And for that consequence to occur, you do need the act to be reported, so that consequences are there. Many times what happens is that people are too embarrassed to even report. They decide to ignore it, or they might think that if I report it, then I'm not going to get a chance in the next movie, and so on. So that shouldn't be the attitude. So if you report it, if you want any action to be taken against it, it's in your hands. You go ahead and do it. And when people have consequence, they are not going to be doing it again.
Thank you, ma'am. There is another question by Nitin AF in the chat box. Uh, how borderline personality disorder among men cause sexual harassment, and what are the methods of intervention to manage such men?
Okay, so that is a very long drawn question. Okay, there are some literature points out to the fact that borderline personality, they are involved in impulsive behavior. So that's where the sexual harassment stems up from. So their impulsiveness in various situations. So it's not just sexual harassment. They would be involved in various other impulsive behavior like consuming alcohol or substance use. So you need to find out about that, what is it that is resulting in that impulsive behavior. And for borderline personality, we do know that there are various pharmacological therapy which is available, that is medications that can be given, there are psychotherapy methods that can be used. So it's the same kind of interventions that you would use to manage someone who is a borderline personality who is involved in sexual harassment.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any more queries? Alvin, please go ahead.
Ma'am, ma'am, I have a question. Like, most of the talks based on the gender-based violence actually focus around on the women, the harassment faced by women only. But as in the session you mentioned about that men are also being harassed in the workplaces. Ma'am, as a part of my assignment, I came to read a survey report by Mingle, which is an Indian-based organization that which was a report in 2016 that LGBT people belong to the LGBT community actually faces a sexual workplace harassment, like about 40% of them. So, is there any methodology or strategies that we can implement in these workplaces to make these places more gender inclusive and more friendly for the people from the LGBTQ community? Because what I found from my shared experience and all the things, like most of the people from the LGBT community were in closet. They were not open to the society, but they faces this sort of harassment. Like most become some what they assumed harassments. So how can we manage these harassments, or what are the prevention that we can take, or how can we make this workplace more gender inclusive?
Okay, thank you, Alvin, for that really nice question. So I do agree that sexual harassment is not just experienced by women. Any gender-based harassment is not just for women. In fact, I had master's student who was looking at sexual harassment faced by men at workplaces, and it was a really, really interesting study. And also, I work quite closely with the transgender community, and they also report to be facing harassment at workplaces. I'm sorry about the background noise, the election campaigns going on. Really sorry about that. Okay, so to answer your question, Alvin, the policy and also the prevention strategies at workplace should be gender inclusive. So meaning that you cannot, of course, have a policy just for the LGBT community. So the policy should be gender inclusive, meaning that the action should be the same for everybody. So anyone who is involved in sexual harassment, anyone who faces the sexual harassment, there should be an equality in how you deal with these issues. And you can make a special effort to have the LGBT community open up more. So that is the another aspect to it. So it's not just sexual harassment issues, it could be various other issues. They need to be really open about what problems that they face and so on, for which you need a good HR department in the organization. You need a good, you can have employee counselors who can be useful in these situations and so on.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Any more questions? If there are, yeah, yes, ma'am.
Hello, Anitha ma'am. It was a very interesting talk. And I think we have got a very good clarity about the sexual harassment and its later aspects of what's happening in University of Zambia. My question is that you have actually spoken about what could be done just after the sexual harassment is reported. The action should be taken immediately, and the maybe the victim or the survivor, whatever we call them, should be able to stand for that, etc., etc. But I think you are aware about the reality that's happening in India is that most of the time the survivor used to go back, in the sense they withdraw their complaint, and they don't stand on that complaint because there will be so many other political influences and other influences that could happen, that might make them not to stand on their complaint. So this was something very important in this case, because even though the human resource department, or the other support from the organizations would be giving to them, but they'll be also go with the family's honor, etc., etc. So I just wanted to share, that's what actually happening in India. So I just would like to have your perspective on, once a complaint is being given, uh, what would exactly happening, in Zambia University, or maybe in the other international places, and would the same influences would be coming to the survivors, and how do they manage?
Thank you, Tissy. I'll just talk about a recent experience that we had. Like I mentioned, when sexual harassment happens, people many times do not report. And when they report, like you rightly said, there could be retaliation. They could face retaliation from the family or the harasser, and so on. So recently, we had a student, first year student, undergraduate student, who faced harassment from a lecturer who came forward and reported. And within a day, there was a lot of retaliation that she was facing, and she was ready to withdraw the complaint. So this is for the first time we did this. What we did was we created a social shield around her. So we had volunteers who would be with her all the time, not physically be with her, but be around her all the time, so that she feels protected. And this, I know this is it's not sustainable for a long period of time, but we did this until the complaint, because of all the retaliation, the university also involved the police. So until the police took over the complaint, and she was given protection. Until then, we created a social shield around this student. So even if she is in the hostel, those who are in the rooms next to her, they're always keeping a watch. She has phone numbers of several people she can reach out to. So she has a whole list of people who are around her all the time, 24/7, who are protecting her. So that's what we did.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, I have a question. Is there any kind of sexual harassment training like that available? Training, any kind of training available to combat this kind of phenomena?
Yes, there is training. There are various training agencies that I've seen who offer training on sexual harassment in India, and in fact, any organization, they are expected to undergo that training, and that training is just about awareness of what is sexual harassment, how it can be prevented. It's a very basic online training. It's like a progressive training, just like you do the ethics training. So it's something like that which is available, and every person in an organization need to be certified in that. So it is a mandatory according to the Indian law that this happens. And I've seen, I can send you a few people who are providing this training. It's offered by the law association. It's offered by some private sector organizations who are accredited to the government of Kerala or to the central government. So there are various trainings that is available.
Thank you, ma'am.
If there are any more queries, please ask.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Anita, I would just like to ask you something. I'm a teacher in a high secondary school. And like you said, how habits and attitudes are learned. Can't we, the people who make the syllabuses, can't they put something in the syllabus which will make the children aware about the laws of sexual harassment and that it is simply not accepted behavior for in a society? Everybody has nobody's asking for any special favors. Just take your leg off my neck. So everybody has a right to a harassment free environment at job or at school. When can you give it to the children? From what age can you teach about sexual harassment and the laws or the punishments that you get for this?
Okay, thanks, Kathy, for that question. So yes, this curriculum, I do think this curriculum is really important to have a curriculum on sexual harassment, and I would think that this could go into the sexuality curriculum if you have such a curriculum. In Zambia, the sexuality curriculum starts at grade 4. That's when the sexuality curriculum is introduced, and it's progressive. So it depends on, like, when you, if you're talking about law, the laws against harassment to a very young child, it may not really make a lot of sense to them. But then so that's why I said it should be progressive. So it depends, it should be age related. So at a young age, you just talk about what is appropriate behavior, what is not appropriate behavior, how to recognize behavior which is not appropriate. If somebody
Right.
is behaving in a way that you are uncomfortable with, what should you do? What should you do when you're in the school? What should you do when you're at home? So,
Yeah.
and as they progress in the school, the other aspects could be introduced, like the law and things like that, at a later point in time. But then I think this is a more of a moral and a value system that you're teaching the children itself, to be saying that do not accept any
Yeah.
form of abuse against you, and you do not involve in abuse. Respect every human being. So I think that's the message we should be conveying.
Yeah, Anita. Thank you, Dr. Anita. Uh,
Thank you for all the questions and the very insightful talk. Our resource person is already used all the time that she's allotted to us. So if there are any more queries, kindly direct it to her through her email ID shared in the PowerPoint presentation. Now I warmly welcome our respected Professor Dr. Shailaja ma'am to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Anubama. Good evening, one and all. Respected HOD Dr. Bindu, respected IQAC Director of University of Kerala, Professor Dr. Simon Tadresar, respected Professor of this evening, Dr. Anitha Menon, dear colleagues and students. It is my pleasant privilege to deliver the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to congratulate the speaker for her inspiring and interesting topic. Through her speech, she has given us a clear idea and concept about sexual harassment at workplace, procedure for reporting sexual harassment, need to raise voice against sexual harassment not only at workplace but at any place. Through her speech, she focused the importance of every employer to provide a safe and healthy environment at workplace. I am sure it has been an informative and enlightening experience for the students, especially the young psychologists. Let me extend my sincere gratitude on behalf of the Department of Psychology for consenting to a part of the lecture series. Thank you, ma'am. I am also extending my sincere thanks to all the esteemed participants. Once again, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So the meet has ended, but the discussion shall continue. A very thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Anitha ma'am. The meet will end now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.